I am Colby Sumner, and this is America, Fog of War.
Pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of...
The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender.
I can hear you! I can hear you! The rest of the world hears you! And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of it.
We're told that on his body was found a diary. Under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore, I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure.
So we've taken everything through what people typically refer to as the morning phase of the fighting. Even though some of the fighting, they do morning, afternoon, evening. I know some of the phases overlap, but just
Yes.
for I guess ease of understanding, that the morning phase in the cornfield in the West Woods, we've kind of gone through that. As you had mentioned before, French comes across Antietam Creek, can't find where Sedgwick has gone, and again, there's failures in various parts of the Second Corps that lead to that, but it's also, again, we've mentioned it's smoky out there.
It is. It's chaotic.
He's never been to that. He's never been there.
Right.
And it's not like they have radios.
And French is not the most experienced guy. I mean, he's commanded a brigade before in battle. He's a West Pointer, but he's never commanded a division before. They sort of clumped this together with three brigades that were very, very different.
And division command, first off, has to be incredibly difficult.
Yes.
It's, you get that high up, you're not just leading guys in combat, right? Like you're not a lot of what you do is not physically placing them somewhere on the battlefield or motivating them in the battle. A lot of what you do, is giving other people, like delegating orders to get people to do things. And
Right.
you're more in charge of the bird's eye view picture.
Definitely.
And that's a hard thing to do, especially
hard
in the era,
transition for
especially in
many.
the era before the before the radio.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But he comes across Antietam Creek, gets to the East Woods, and sees the sunken road.
Right.
So what happens?
Well, he doesn't see the sunken road, but he sees activity around it.
Okay.
And he thinks that's where I ought to go. So he heads south. He's going to encounter the Muma Farm, which is in flames. He's going to continue moving, and as he does, he has to do this wheel to actually realign himself. And he's heading toward past the William Roulette Farm, and he heads over to the sunken road that he probably didn't know was there. And the sunken
Well, it's hard.
road,
It is hard to see if you're coming from that direction.
It's like impossible. Really.
Fortunately, again, our first tour there, Laura walked us across the fields. Like we were approaching, like we were
Yes.
in French's division, and you cannot see
You
it
can't see
until you crest that last hill
That's
before the
correct.
sunken road.
There's
That's when you
hills.
can finally see it.
That's correct.
And again, if you've never been on the battlefield, I highly recommend going, because seeing the terrain
Right.
with your own eyes and walking the ground, you realize just how challenging this is going to be, because by the time you do see the sunken road, you're almost on
You're
top
there,
of it.
right.
And the guys in the sunken road are in a very, very well deflated position.
No
right?
question about it.
They have great cover. They're in a position that if this was a modern battle,
Mhm.
if I had my squad in the sunken road and we were fighting like a large Taliban force, they could outnumber us by a lot. and we would be able to take the day.
Oh, definitely.
Without a doubt.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
And that's what happens.
Yeah. And so D.H. Hill is the guy that's kind of in charge of things over
Right.
there, correct?
So D.H. Hill has sent 3 of his brigades already to the cornfield that we've talked about. He's retained 2. In fact, he's going to send those 2, Robert Rhodes and George B. Anderson's brigades. He was actually going to send them to the cornfield when the setbacks occurred. And he says, we're just going to stay around the sunken road and hold our position. And Colquitt, who is beaten up pretty good, he's going to form behind, in the part of the sunken road by Hagerstown Pike. He's going to be joined by Cobb's Legion, or Cobb's Brigade, which was very small. It was beaten up at Frosttown Plateau. And then you have, on the other side of the Muma Farm Lane, you have Robert Rhodes's brigade. They were beaten up at Frosttown Plateau, remember. They're down to maybe 800 guys. And then when the road curves to the right, then you have G.B. Anderson's North Carolina boys who were at Fox's Gap. They didn't do a lot at Fox's Gap. They did charge a battery, and they did take some losses. But especially these 2 brigades of Daniel Harvey Hill are the ones who are going to carry the fight for the most part. And here comes French's division, and as you said, over the hill. Now, one of the things that's confusing to many visitors of the battlefield is they see all these trees, and they say, how could they see each other? Well, most of those trees were non-existent. You know, yes, the north woods, east woods, the west woods, but the rest of it was completely bare. And they called this battle artillery hell. Good artillery placements, platforms, and open area equals a lot of casualties.
Well, speaking of artillery hell, this is just something, when you said that, this just made me think about this. But not only do you have all the artillery on this side of the Antietam Creek, where the actual battle is taking place, but you also have the 20-inch Parrott rifles that are across Antietam Creek as well.
That's right.
And they're raining all kind of havoc on that area also.
No question about it. And you got Tompkins Battery that is near the current visitor center that is firing so fast and furiously that I never heard this before. The barrels begin to melt.
Get out of here.
Where they have the vents, that they'll thumb the vent. That becomes enlarged to the point where those cannons can't be used any longer.
What kind are they smoothbore? Are they Napoleons or are they rifle guns?
They are Parrotts, as I recall.
Oh wow, so they're not even brass. They're straight up iron cannons, and they're melting.
That's right.
Wow. That's
and
unbelievable.
As I recall, and so they have to be replaced. I've never heard that
either.
They had to be replaced. So I mean, they're also decimating those Confederates in the sunken road. And so, and a lot of people ask me about tactics during the Civil War, and I really can't answer it. I mean, you take Fredericksburg. I wrote the book Maps of Fredericksburg, and most people never get to Prospect Hill. They think it's only Murray Heights and the stone wall at the base of it. But Stonewall Jackson's having his hands full further over. Rather than all of these Union brigades, divisions, and corps attacking at once, you have these single brigades. It's 18 of them. One brigade defeated. Another brigade defeated. Another. I mean, it is so bloody that they're literally climbing over clumps of dead men and dying men to get to this wall. And the same thing happens here at Frederick with French. He doesn't launch his 6,000-man division against essentially probably about 1,000 guys. He could have overwhelmed them. In the first line, he has garrison troops under Weber, although it's pronounced Weber because he was German. And they're going to get stopped in their tracks at the top of the hill. Next, he brings up Morris's brigade, rookies. And not only are they firing into the backs of these garrison guys.
Oh, my gosh.
You get friendly fire.
Awful.
But also, when they finally get to the top of the hill, they're going to be decimated. And they fall back. And finally, you bring up Kimball's brigade, which is, you always keep your veterans in the rear. They are your gold standard. They're not the cannon fodder. And so he is ordered to bring them up, and they're not going to make themselves exposed. They're going to make themselves a small, lying down, crouching down. They're going to be firing into the sunken road, and that's when the Confederate casualties really start piling up.
Because even though it's a good position, it's also very easily and very quickly it turns into a death trap.
No question about it.
And it gets only worse from there.
It certainly does. And so what happens then is it becomes a standoff where neither side can drive the other away. And that fighting, by the way, begins at 9:15 in the morning. So it's happening around the time that Sedgwick is getting beaten up. It's after the cornfield, still in the morning. About 11 o'clock, Israel Richardson's division comes up. Now, they are experienced. These guys know what they're doing.
He's got the Irish Brigade with him, right?
Got Irish Brigade. You got Caldwell's Brigade. You got Brooks's Brigade. And these guys know what they're doing. And Israel Richardson is a very seasoned, experienced division commander. Fought at on the peninsula 7 days. So he knows how to command a division, unlike French. And he's going to throw forward the Irish Brigade. And the Irish Brigade has been beaten up. Every battle it's been in, it gets beaten up pretty good. Its units were at the first Bull Run, second Bull Run. No, actually, they weren't a second Bull. Certainly during the 7 days, they were gotten beaten up pretty good. Were not engaged on the 14th of September. But here they are coming over that hill. And remember, their commander is Thomas Marr, Irish revolutionary, does not believe in rifles, believes in smooth bore, close-in fighting.
Buck and ball kind of thing.
That's correct. And many of the North Carolina boys in that sunken road, they've got Bloody Lane. They got rifles. So as the Irish Brigade is coming over the ridge, which is a couple 100 yards away, maybe 150, they can't fire off their muskets, and so they're getting blasted to pieces between the small arms fire, but also the artillery fire of the artillery guns, of the Confederate guns. But they keep coming. They keep coming, and they will get close enough. They will blast those Confederates. But again, they have a stalemate. And this is, and I think, I don't know if I mentioned this, the 69th New York, one of the Irish regiments. They're the ones where their flank, the right flank, was resting on the roulette farm lane, will lose over 63% of their men.
Jeez.
I mean, horrible. The other units less, but still quite a few. And they can't drive Anderson's men away. And Anderson's men can't get rid of these Irish guys. And so Richardson is going to bring up the next brigade, which is John Caldwell's brigade. And the Irish Brigade is still going to be in action as Caldwell's brigade comes up. And this is happening between 11 and 12 o'clock. It doesn't take a long time. And I should mention that the Confederates have been reinforced now.
Right, because R.H. Anderson gets in the fight a little bit with the Florida Brigade. I have to give a little nod to the Florida Brigade. They get a bad rap here at Gettysburg because of some press after the fact. Which Georgian commander or South Carolina? There's a brigade commander from South Carolina or Georgia or something that almost immediately after the battle he starts writing a letter to a newspaper talking about how the Florida Brigade kind of left him out high and dry. And it turns out that's really not the case.
This was Ambrose Wright.
That's it, Ambrose Wright.
Yeah.
And they get a bad rap because of that. But
yeah, they do.
But you know, I like the Florida Brigade. Yeah, they're from my state, so.
Okay.
A lot of them might not have been. A lot of them might have been from Georgia too. I know there was a lot of border crossing.
Yeah, they had their problems at Antietam. Roads when Anderson's men have marched all night from Harper's Ferry. They're marching behind Lafayette McLaws'. Lafayette McLaws' men at least get a rest, not Anderson. So imagine marching all night. You've not eaten, and immediately at 10 o'clock in the morning, you are that's your destination over there. That sunken road, go at it, guys. And almost immediately, and as you mentioned, Colby, the number of cannon on that guns of position, they're raining death all over the column. And one of the guys who gets wounded early on is Richard Anderson. His second in command is Roger Pryor, who's a brigade commander, he was an attorney, he was a newspaper editor, he was in politics. He wasn't good at anything, but he certainly wasn't a good commander. And the division actually breaks apart. So this very large, about maybe 4,000 man division, that the thinking is Richard Anderson might have known that he's going to hit the right flank of French's division. We don't really know because he didn't file a report. It just falls apart, and each brigade is marching toward the sunken road in a different way. And the Florida boys are going to stay, and they're part of Pryor's brigade. They stay in the orchard, which is behind the sunken road.
Okay.
And they don't know where to go, what to do, because Pryor is incompetent, and whether he is commanding the division, we don't really know that. And it's interesting because Robert Rhodes will come out, General Rhodes. He sees these Florida boys, and he rides over and he finds Pryor. He says, "I need those guys," and Pryor gets them moving toward the sunken road. So it wasn't their fault.
Yeah.
They just didn't have orders, and they were especially the 8th was not experienced.
Right. You had, what was it, the 1st and the 3rd Florida, or the 2nd and the 3rd Florida?
The 2nd, the 8th, and I think it was those two. I think there was a 12th, but I don't.
Maybe
think
that's
they
it.
were.
I know like the numbers don't make sense how they have them numbered. But
Right.
One of the Florida regiments goes out to the Western Theater, from what I understand, and then the other 3 are here in the
It's
East.
a very small brigade.
So you were saying some stuff. You were talking about Rhodes coming out. There's 2 things that I want to just throw out there. You don't have to tell them right now, but I want to make sure they get covered because they're very descriptive of what this fighting is like, and I want to make sure the audience gets to hear them. The first is Gordon, the Confederate, him and his wounds that he suffers, and then also I heard a story about D.H. Hill.
Yes.
Riding his horse over to Longstreet and Lee and being up on his horse and telling them that he needed, I don't know if he needed men or whatever he's going over to them for. And he's very agitated. It's the heat of battle and he's in a hurry, and Longstreet's telling him, "You better get off your horse." And, he's saying, "I don't have time to get off my horse. I need this or that or whatever." And Longstreet says, a cannon across the Antietam Creek, he sees a poof of smoke come out of it, and he says, "That one's for you." And then what happens as a result of that. So those 2 stories, I feel like they would be interesting to hear.
I think the second one might have been a little bit before the battle, and they were around the cemetery, and one of those cannonballs actually is going to take off the leg of I think Daniel Harvey Hill's horse.
The front legs, correct?
Yes.
So it just falls onto these
correct.
stumps.
Yes.
Could you imagine that? You're on a horse and all of a sudden its front legs are gone.
Gone.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
But Hill will be very active. I mean, D.H. Hill is a very aggressive fighter to the point where during the 7 Days battles and at 7 Pines, they're afraid that he's going to be too aggressive. Now, for most of these generals, push, push, push. I want you to be more. He's too aggressive, according to Longstreet and others.
I kind of like that about him.
Yeah, but very caustic personality, hates everybody, criticizes everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so what happens is you've got Richard Anderson's divisions come up, and they've really just flooded the sunken road. And there's a guy, I also love his book, Thomas Galway, These Valiant Hours. I don't know if you've read it.
I haven't read it, but I know of the book that you're talking
It's great.
about.
It's Stackpole. It's not been reprinted. I got it on Kindle for like $3 or something. And he's with the 8th Ohio, which is part of Kimball's men. He says, "I'm seeing all these rebels getting into the sunken road. He says, I don't know how that road can handle so many hundreds and hundreds of men. And it can't. They can't even move around. They're so squeezed together. And what happens eventually, to make a long story short, is a couple things. One is, and it's getting toward 12 o'clock, you have Francis Barlow, who we all know from Gettysburg fame, Barlow's Knoll. He commands a couple of consolidated regiments, 61st and 64th New York. And he apparently sees the right flank of on the Confederate line in the sunken road. And on his own, he moves his regiments in that direction and hits their flank, rear, and front, and just drives them and just rolls up the whole flank.
And there's a mortuary cannon out there for somebody.
2 mortuary cannons. One is for George B. Anderson. And George B. Anderson is going to go, now he commands his North Carolina boys, who are there initially. He's going to go to the rear to confer with D.H. Hill. This is before Anderson comes up. And he's going to get himself shot. And when he comes back, he's going to get himself shot in the ankle. And the surgeons look at the wound and say, we don't have to amputate. Just stay off of it. It should be fine. And he says to the surgeons, well, wait a minute. If I'm going to stay off of it, I might as well stay off of it at home in Raleigh, North Carolina, because my wife is expecting her first child. I'm going to get on a train. And the surgeon said, don't do that because it's bad. And that trauma is not going to go well. He says, you guys don't know anything. Gets on the train. And that ankle, the wound so often, and it's so fascinating during the Civil War, wounds that aren't serious kill them. And wounds that are so deadly,
they survive.
It's
like Jackson at
Crazy how that
Chancellorsville.
is.
It's kind of the same.
That's right. Nobody thought he was going to die, but then he got pneumonia. And so what happens is it gets infected. It has to be amputated, and eventually it's going to kill him. On the 16th of October, not even the anniversary of the battle, and he's going to die just a day before his daughter is born.
Wow.
So
How
that's
sad is that?
That's horrendous.
Yeah, it really is. And it was potentially avoidable. And he was a good commander. So you're going to have the line rolling up, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your persuasion, the 2 regiments on the left of George B. Anderson's line didn't know what was going on, and all of a sudden you have all these Yankees descending on them, and they're going to sustain heavy losses, and many of them are going to be captured.
It's basically they're like fish in a barrel at this point.
No question about it.
Seems like it.
My time in the military and in combat taught me the importance of being prepared. A lot can happen on the battlefield that can lead to tragedy, and I never wanted to face the consequences of failure due to a lack of my preparedness, especially when my brothers were counting on me. That's because my squad was my family. Now that I've finished my military service, what I need to do to prepare has changed, but my responsibility to ensure I am properly prepared for any eventuality remains the same. That's why I called Health Markets. One of their licensed agents took the time to examine every aspect of my family's protection and created a personalized solution of coverages that would safeguard my family and keep us prepared to face whatever the future could throw our way. So that if I find myself in the hospital, out of work from an illness or injury, or reach that inevitable last breath, I can know that my family won't ever suffer the added tragedy of financial desperation. So go to www.healthmarkets.com to connect with an agent and make the preparations you need to face any eventuality today. And what part of this fighting does Richardson get killed?
Okay, so what happens is at the other end of the line, you have Rhodes. And this is one of the mysteries. There are lots of mysteries. Why are these brigades attacking one after another, as opposed to the entire division just overwhelming the enemy? And Richardson's doing the same thing. Fredericksburg, they did the same thing. You have at Gettysburg, you have individual brigades. That's the attack, Longstreet's attack. Well, what happens is you have the regiment on the right is George Gordon's. And I think George Gordon is probably Lee's finest. I think he's better than Longstreet. I think he's better than Jackson.
I like him, man. I
this
like
guy,
him.
and he's not a military guy.
No, but he likes to fight.
He likes
He's
to fight.
funny. What he says to his wife later in the day is hysterical.
And he knows how to command troops.
Mhm.
He almost rolled up the entire Union Army at the Battle of the Wilderness. And at Spotsylvania twice he saves Lee's army. And he is going to be commanding a corps at Appomattox. His corps is going to be the last corps that actually launches an attack against the Yanks.
He's the one that Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain talks about doing the salute on the horse, the where he bows his horse.
Yes.
Which is also an incredible like little snippet of history there. Just
Indeed.
hearing that is amazing. But anyways, I'm sorry.
So he is going to be commanding 6th Alabama, although he's a Georgia boy. And he's never really been, I don't think he's ever been wounded in battle before. And he gets wounded 4 times. A couple times in the arms, a couple times in the legs. And he's not vacating. He's staying with his men. They want him to vacate. No. And the 5th bullet will I don't know if it hit, I don't know if it creased or whatever. Apparently it was bad enough that he falls forward into his hat. Now, he writes his memoirs, which are part novel, part, I mean, you don't know what's true. He's,
Right.
He's like Chamberlain, he embellishes.
Right.
And he talks about very dramatically how blood is pooling up in his hat. He's going to drown in his own blood. And then another Yankee bullet is going to hit his hat, and the blood is going to drain out.
If it weren't for that bullet hitting the hat, he would have drowned.
Just at the right time.
Now, from just to deviate on him a little bit here, from my understanding, whose division did he fall under?
He's under D.H. Hill's
Or
division.
I'm sorry, whose wing was it? Jackson or Longstreet that he fell under normally?
He was under Longstreet's wing. Well, it gets complicated.
Well, because from what I understand,
Jackson?
his wife wanted to be with the army all the time. She was always trying to come to wherever the army was encamped, and maybe it was Jackson said, he didn't want Gordon's wife being there. Right. Jackson's very much like, I'm on campaign. This is the boys' club. No wives,
yes.
no wives, and by the end of the war, by the end of that stint, that changes. Jackson,
Yes.
Jackson says she can
Right.
be there, but after he's wounded at Antietam, he's held up at some barn, on some farm away from the battlefield, and she comes to see him, and is obviously he's just pieced up. He's got bullet wounds everywhere, one in his face. And doesn't he say something along the lines of when she walks in the door, he says, "Hey, honey, come give your handsome husband a kiss," or something like that.
Right.
Hysterical.
He was a character.
That's hysterical.
So he's out of action, and his second in command is a man by the name of Lieutenant Colonel James Lightfoot, who's never commanded the regiment before. And something happens that, again, is indescribable. And I can't understand what happens. But here you have a brigade commander. Robert Rhodes is pretty effective. He talks in his report about how his aide is wounded. He leaves the battle line to take his aide to the rear to get aid. Who does that?
Not any good commanders.
And he admits it as though it was fine.
Yeah, if you're not a good commander if you're doing that.
And so what happens is, before that happens, Lightfoot is saying to his new brigade commander, Rhodes, "What should I do? The enemy is enfilading my right flank." Rhodes will tell this inexperienced regimental commander, "Simply turn your regiment, swivel to the left, face the offending Union troops, and fire into them. That should take care of it." And then Rhodes leaves with his aide, who's wounded. And for whatever reason, whether it was a misinterpretation, probably was, Lightfoot orders his men to about-face march. Now, about-face march is not swiveling to the right. And the guy, that's the 6th Alabama, is leaving the sunken road. And you can imagine the commander of the 5th Alabama, who's to the left, says, hey, is that just for you or is that everybody's orders? He says, I think it's all of us.
Oh, Jesus.
And the whole brigade is leaving the sunken road. And you can imagine the horror of Rhodes as he's riding back. All of his men are vacating. And he sees the Yankees from French's division, who are still on that side of the road, the lane, coming forward to occupy. It's too late. So between that misunderstanding, supposedly, although it did happen, there's no question about it, and that flanking action on the other side, the Confederates are going to be vacating the sunken road. Now, we need to go back, and I talk about this on tours. Did the cornfield have any significant value? No. The significant value was the high ground around the church.
The Dunkard Church.
Earlier.
It was just it was just the where the fight took place
was
on
the
the
line
way
in
to the
the
Dunkard
sand.
Church.
Right. Did the sunken road have any significance? No. The significance was, and I should get back and tell you that what the Yanks are really trying to do now is get toward Sharpsburg. They could see Sharpsburg in the distance, and if they can get into Sharpsburg, they can cleave Lee's army in half, and they can seal off his escape route to the Potomac River, where there's a ford at Shepherdstown. And so what happens then is that they've taken the sunken road, no significant value, but the significant value is straight ahead of them. And there's nobody ahead of them, in front of them, between Sharpsburg and them, except these demoralized, beaten Confederates. And there will be intense fighting for the next hour or so in the Piper Farm, which is that area. And D.H. Hill, who is, as I mentioned, very, very aggressive, he's not taking this lightly. Legendary. Now, major generals do not have guns. They do not have pistols. They do not have rifles. They have a ceremonial saber, which they never use. In fact, it's interesting. Stonewall Jackson, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Second Bull Run campaign. Yes, it was Second Bull Run. His men are getting defeated. He's trying to pull his sword out of his saber, and it's rusted shut because it's just ceremonial.
Right.
And so he has to unhook it, and
he kicks off the charge
right.
with the sheath still on.
That's correct.
Saber.
That's correct. He grabs a musket. Major generals don't grab muskets. He gathers a couple hundred guys, and he's going to launch a desperate counterattack against these guys, mainly from Caldwell's brigade. And they just get pushed aside. D.H. Hill isn't wounded, but, I mean, it's pretty desperate. And that fighting will continue for about an hour or so. And getting back to that other mortuary cannon, General Richardson, around where the observation tower is, you can see there's a big old tree to the left of it as you're facing it. Well, sort of behind it. There's a big old tree, and there was Graham's battery right there. He's trying to reposition that Union battery so it can, excuse me, it can infiltrate the Confederate position where these men are all demoralized, but that'll really drive them away. A Confederate shell, case shell, will explode over his head, and it's got all these dozens of these little lead balls. They embed themselves in his lungs.
Yikes.
And so he's mortally wounded, and that's really going to have an impact on that attack.
Right, because, I mean, from on any battlefield, if you're, let's just if we're going to talk modern war, for instance, or as modern as we can, where you have like a big battle. So let's take World War II, for instance, and you have a company making a push through a sector of German occupied territory,
right?
And they've been in they've been in the fighting for a while, and they have a very beloved company commander who's led them through thick and thin. If that company commander is killed, more times than not, it sucks the wind right out of that company.
Yes, very much so.
And they, not that they become ineffective in battle, but they're not going to have any kind of momentum pushing them forward. They kind of more times than not will end up just plopping down right where they're at.
And also, it's going to take some time for them to find a replacement for Richardson. Turns out it's Winfield Hancock. who will ultimately assume command of his division. And that's going to take the wind out of the attack. They're running out of ammunition. They've been fighting for a while now. And they tell them, and we're bringing up reinforcements that aren't coming up so fast. So it takes the wind out of that attack. And so that desperate fighting at the sunken road, bloody lane, amounts to really nothing.
And just for the viewer's sake, what does the aftermath of the sunken road look like? I mean, I know there are pictures, but just description-wise,
Yes. And so photographers are going, one of the things that's interesting is this is the first battle that photographers come after the battle. Nobody knew what a battle looked like.
Right, this is the first time in history anybody in the civilian populace is going to see what war looks like.
That's right.
Like actually, not
That's
a painting, not a sketch.
Nope.
Real photographs.
You're seeing the real thing. There's no glory. Then they're seeing it. And unfortunately, what they're seeing is they're not seeing too many Union dead because they've already been buried. They're coming about 3 days after. What they're seeing is they're seeing rebel dead. Lots of rebel dead. Excuse me.
No, you're good. You're good.
You could probably get rid of that. Anyway, it's one of the iconic photographs. There are lots of iconic photographs of this battle. One is Dunker Church, how beat up it was.
Mm-hmm.
Another is I don't really want to say hundreds, scores and scores of dead Confederates in the bloody lane. I mean, once you see it, you can't get it out of your mind.
There are sections of the sunken road where you couldn't even touch the ground if you wanted to.
Oh, there's no way.
Through it.
There's no section that you really can walk into. On the peripheries, yeah. William Roulette will talk about 700 bodies being buried on his farm.
Jeez.
700.
Now, what are the overall casualty numbers in the sunken road
We're
fight?
looking at about 6,500 men are going to be killed, wounded, or missing in about 3.5 hours.
So far, just to recap here, it's 8,000 or more at the cornfield.
Right.
How many did you say in the Westwoods? 20?
Oh, gosh. You're between all the fighting there, you're looking just for it's 2,200 just for Sedgwick.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have some bloody charges. Confederates, when they see cannon, they're going to attack cannon.
They want those cannon.
And they're going to bloody repulses. So McLaws is going to lose probably a couple thousand. And you're going to have Greene in there. You're probably looking, the Westwoods, I don't have a figure, but probably about another maybe 6,000 or so.
All right, so 8,000 in the cornfield area, another 6,000 or so in the Westwoods, and then another 6,500 at the sunken road.
I think we're getting to. So what are we up to now?
About 20, 18.
Okay.
We might be a little over.
I think we're okay then.
Oh, okay.
I think we may be
because the
pretty
Burnside
close.
Bridge has casualties, but it's not anywhere
about
close
500
to the.
or so.
It's not anywhere close.
No,
to
the
the
final
ones.
attack will also have casualties, but again, pales in relation to these others.
So the sunken road. I guess I guess my favorite part of the battle to study is the morning phase, the cornfield and the Westwoods,
Yes.
and the Eastwoods for the night before. I like that's what I enjoy the most, but the one that seems to resonate with me the most as to like this is the bloodiest day in American history is the sunken road.
No question about it.
It's so easy to it's especially when you go there and you see it. It's so easy to visualize it and understand. Good God, I mean, you see how big the road is, and then you see the picture.
Right.
You think, good Lord, man. I mean, that is death and destruction at a different level.
No question about it. And it's unfortunate that you don't have a lot of. Alexander Gardner was the photographer who came. He worked for Brady, and he took a lot of photographs. And we don't think he was moving bodies around like he was at Gettysburg. But he never took really pictures of the aftermath of the cornfield.
I was curious as to why, because I've noticed that as well in my research, and you can't really find. I mean, you have the one picture of the Hagerstown Pike
and the Louisiana Boys.
Yeah, but outside of that, that part of the battlefield, there's nothing else.
No, and they've got a horse that was killed around that area who just sort of looks like he's just kneeling down, but totally dead. But yeah, and I think that would bring it out as well, but it just did not. And again, remember that you're only seeing the rebels in the bloody lane. You're not seeing the thousands of Union men who were on the hills dead, and there were some Confederate counterattacks. So they're not just Union guys on those hills; they're also Confederate bodies. I mean, we just can't comprehend how horrible.
I'm
it
going
must
to tell
have
you right
been.
now, the smell of that battlefield 3 days after,
Ooh.
you'd smell that for miles.
But at Gettysburg, they talk about even after months after, the stench is still there,
It's-
even after they buried the bodies.
Yeah.
I have a theory on this because there's nothing. My wife and I were talking about this the other day, how some smells tend to just stick in your nose. And she brought up this whole thing about, well, you don't smell things, you notice a change in smells, right? You that's what your nose
Interesting.
recognizes. And she was asking me why something, we were having this conversation as to why some things just linger in your nose. And I said, well, the one thing that I remember lingering in my nose the longest is burnt flesh, right? Burnt flesh. I don't know what it is. That will
Yes.
stay in your nose and in your mouth. You'll taste it for
Yes.
days. It just doesn't
Yes.
go. And you won't be, you'll be in different clothes. You won't
Right.
be anywhere near it anymore, and it's still there. And I have a theory on that. I think it's because something in your subconscious psyche and in your, in your genetic makeup, like the natural aversion to snakes. Humans have a natural aversion to
Yes.
snakes. It's like a
Yes.
survival instinct.
Right.
It's almost the same thing. You smell what you would smell like burning, and it just
Oh.
lingers. There's just something about it that sticks.
Interesting.
That's
That is
kind of my
interesting.
thought on it. But
Yeah.
I say that, and then you have people. They talk about it for months at Gettysburg. There has to be people coming into town that weren't there at the beginning, and they're smelling
Oh,
it
they're
too.
still smelling
So
it.
it's got to be beyond that.
Yes.
Now, because we're getting ready to get into the Burnside attack down
Yes.
at the lower bridge,
Yes.
and I understand why this tends to be one of the more popular spots on the Antietam battlefield, and it's because of the bridge. The bridge is very
Yes.
famous.
And
It's
very
the
scenic.
photographs, the
Yes.
paintings.
Right.
But there's a lot of what I find the most interesting about this part of the battle is, I find the fighting obviously interesting, but the thing I find the most interesting is all the stuff that happens at the command level and all the confusion that's going on between Burnside and the other guy that was supposed to be in charge. I forget his name. The other guy that was supposed to be in charge of the Ninth Corps, and then also the debate between whether McClellan's orders are clear to Burnside, or if Burnside has taken his time or it misinterprets the orders.
Yes.
So that being said, I guess could you give us a little background on what's going on with Burnside and the Ninth
Sure.
Corps?
Okay. We really have to go before the day before the battle, on the 16th. So that afternoon, McClellan's very active. He did not stay in his headquarters. He's very active the day before. He's making sure that everybody understands their orders. He's going to go and visit Hooker the evening before. He's going to go visit Burnside the day before. And when he comes to Burnside, now there's some confusion about who's in command of the Ninth Corps now. And we're not certain what really happened. When there was, as McClellan is moving north from the Washington area, he's going to divide his army into wings.
One's under Sumner.
One's
correct?
under Sumner, one's under Franklin, one is under Burnside. And he's going to dissolve the wings on the eve of the battle. And according to Jacob Cox, Burnside never writes about it. According to Cox, and Cox wrote a lot, how Burnside would not believe that the wing structure was abolished. He still commanded that wing.
And Cox, just to clarify, is who replaced Reno as the Ninth Corps commander.
That's right. So he was a division commander from Ohio. He could replace Jesse Reno after he's killed at Fox's Gap. And according to him, Burnside would not take command of the Ninth Corps. He's going to stand right beside Cox, And when a courier comes with orders, they'll hand it to Burnside. Burnside will look at it, hand it to Cox. Now, there's some who believe that Cox was exaggerating, that he's basically he's scapegoating Burnside for what happened. We don't really know. There was no real other indication that we found of what happened.
What is your take on it personally, just having an understanding of Burnside in general?
Burnside is an interesting character. He had his real problems at Fredericksburg.
Of course.
But what I like about Burnside was that he knew his capabilities. He would not command the Army of the Potomac. He knew it was above him. The Peter Principle was not going to work on him because he knew his capacity. He had just gotten back from North Carolina where he had all these major victories.
Right. He had a very successful campaign.
He did.
I don't know the number of forts that they end up capturing, but it's a large swath of the coast that he ends up claiming for the Union.
North Carolina.
And then after that, he links back up, I guess, with the Army is he there for Second Manassas?
He's there, but yes, he's there, and he's going to fight at Second Manassas.
I thought I couldn't remember clearly.
Yes,
he misses the 7 days though.
He's in North Carolina then. Yes.
Now, and another thing a lot of people know about Burnside is at one point you were talking about it. Lincoln offers him after he's thinking about firing McClellan. And he offers Burnside command of the Army of the Potomac, and he says Mac should be the one. Mac meaning
and they're good
George
friends.
McClellan. And something before the. From my understanding, Burnside was down on his luck. He had invented the Burnside carbine, but it had really not taken off at that point.
That's right.
And he had to sell the patent on it, which is another sad story. And then he needed a job, and his friend George McClellan from West Point gave him a job in the railroads, right?
Yes.
Now, a caveat, the Burnside carbine is the third most used carbine by the Union, from what I understand, in the war. I think that I could be wrong, but I think that's it.
It certainly was used.
And he didn't make a dime from it because before the war he sold the rights to it. Sad. That's sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't really know what happened. We do know that he is going to be scapegoated by McClellan during the campaign. And they had this pitched battle on the 14th at Fox's Gap. And, it was, some would say, and I don't know where Burnside was during most of the fighting, but it was really not Jesse Cox, it was Jesse Reno who was in charge of that fight. And the Northern forces could have overwhelmed the Confederates earlier in the day, but they did not. And it's not until nightfall that the Confederates are going to pull out on their own. And the travesty, according to McClellan, is that he being Burnside, allowed the men to sleep at Fox's Gap that night rather than pursue the rebels. And not only that, and I'm going to step back and say that's not, Brad, you're wrong. He was supposed to get his men moving early in the morning of the 15th.
And he let them rest longer.
He let them
than
rest.
that.
And here comes General Sykes, who commands a division of the 5th Corps. And they're supposed to be going over Fox's Gap. And you get all these guys from the 9th Corps just sort of lying around. And McClellan was furious. And I've never seen this. An official correspondence from the Army commander to a Corps commander demanding to know why he did what he did. Usually they'll take him aside. Usually they'll talk to him. He wanted this. He was so furious. He wanted this in writing.
Well, I wonder if that kind of plays into there's going to be a lot of blame cast on McClellan, obviously, for his Peninsula campaign, and then thus the 7 days battle after that.
Right.
I wonder if McClellan is trying to cover his bases almost. This time I'm going to make sure if I have someone that doesn't do something I want him to do, I'm going to get it in writing, official, so that it can be tracked and they can see that it wasn't like my call to have this happen.
McClellan was an interesting character. you know, he has the rap of being slow, of being not the most aggressive. He did pretty well during the Antietam campaign, but he had this cloud over him after the 7 days. And I think that he felt that that Lincoln was overly harsh with him. He didn't like that Lincoln was taking a hands-on approach, and the two were clashing about this. And I think this influenced his behavior during the campaign. He's going to be much more aggressive because he has to redeem himself. And maybe, yes, and maybe he's going, as a way to not cast aspersions on himself, he's going to scapegoat whoever he can, and it happens to be Burnside. So what happens then is during the day before the battle, McClellan will come over and meet with Cox and meet with Burnside. Who's in command of Ninth Corps? We don't really know. I know if it really matters that much. And they look at the bridge, lower bridge, Rohrbach Bridge, which is about 125 feet long and about maybe 12 to 15 feet wide. And they all agree there is no way 12,000 guys are going to be able to go over that bridge that's defended.
Even though it's defended by a small number of
But they didn't
Georgians.
really know that.
And when you go there and you see that terrain, we were talking about choke points in the last episode.
Yes.
And I'm going to be honest with you, as a infantry guy, that is a Christmas present just being laid right in your lap.
Right.
If you're those Georgians on top of
Yes.
the hill,
Yeah.
even though there's only, it's basically a skirmisher line.
They don't have very many, 400 to 500 to defend that crossing.
that whole crossing.
Yes.
That being said, you are shooting. We mentioned this before. The sunken road, fish in a barrel. This is truly fish in a barrel.
Right.
You have you clearly have a defined starting point and ending point, and as long as you stop them before they get to that ending point on the bridge,
Right.
You're good. As long as you have the ammo, you can sit up there and pick them off all day.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to have to. I wouldn't want to be faced with the prospect of having to cross that bridge and gain a foothold.
Yes. And, again, we should step back and look at McClellan's plans. The bridge has no significance. What McClellan was trying to do is early in the morning, he's going to hit Lee's left flank. He says, if that's not successful, then I'm going to hit his right flank. But in order to get to his right flank, he's got to get into position after crossing Antietam Creek. The 1st, the 2nd, and the 12th Corps, it was basically undefended, so they could just stroll across. Here, you got 400 to 500 Georgia boys on a position that you can only dream of. It's like magnified by 10 times, essentially. And they realize there's no way that we're going to be able to get over that bridge under enemy fire. And they remembered that a farmer said that there was a ford downstream. So the thinking is they'll send their chief engineer downstream on the 16th, find that ford, and they'll position about 4,000 guys, Yankees, under Isaac Grodman, who will then, at the morning of the battle, cross over and come behind, flank the Confederates, the Georgia boys, and drive them away. And the attacks on the bridge would be diversionary. They would not be the major attacks because they could not succeed. That was the plan. And it all went downhill and unraveled when the engineer gets off his horse on the 16th and gets into the water, and he's going to test to see, is this actually the ford? And as he's coming through the water, these Georgia boys, there aren't a lot of them, definitely a very thin skirmish line at that point because it's further downstream. They open fire. And he says, I'm not doing this. They can't pay me enough. He's unarmed anyway. And he says, that's a ford, gets back on his horse and tells Burnside and Cox that's where the ford is. So in the morning of battle, Isaac Grodman, 4,000 guys, and the rest are, in the area of the bridge. And so here's where the scapegoating begins. McClellan at about 9:40, I believe it was, in that general area, around 9:30, will send a message to Burnside/Cox, take the bridge, begin your attack. And Burnside/Cox will launch their first attack at 10 in the morning. And McClellan will say, he waited till 10 in the morning. He should have done it much earlier. Well, the orders are very, very clear. It was to be, he got the orders about 9:30ish. So you can't blame him for that. You can blame him maybe for his men resting at Fox's Gap, but not this. And so the first attack is going to happen at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it involves George Crooks's Ohio Brigade, which had fought at Fox's Gap. These are Ohio boys, and everything is confused. Crook has no idea where the bridge is. He thinks Sturgis, who's launching the second attack after him, has already attacked, and that attack goes nowhere. And Burnside and Cox said, we don't really care because this is diversionary.
Right, they're still waiting on Rodman to cross the ford.
And Rodman isn't crossing the ford. They're not hearing, they're expecting to hear gunfire downstream, and there's no gunfire. Turns out it wasn't the ford. So Rodman has to march downstream to find the ford. So the next attack is going to be happening at 11 o'clock in the morning. And the next two attacks will be under men from Daniel Sturgis's division. And the first attack is going to be 11 o'clock. And they're running literally parallel on a road parallel to the Antietam Creek. And they're imagine they're not coming this way, they're coming this way. They're actually paralleling the rebels, and they will blast them to pieces. And again, so it goes nowhere, and Burnside and Cox say, okay, we expect that. But where's the flanking action? They still haven't found the ford. So you get to the noon era. And if you're standing at the bluff where the Georgia boys are, you can see in the distance there's a big hill beyond the bridge. And that is where you have most of Edward Ferrero's brigade under Daniel Sturgis. And they're going to make the next attack, the 12 o'clock attack. Takes a little while because these guys are not interested in attacking the bridge. This is the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York.
The twin 51st,
yes.
Right?
And they're at the top of the hill. Now, this is, someone in a unit history explained this as happening. We don't really know if this is true or if this was made up, but the whiskey story. So here's Edward Ferrero, who was before the war a part-time dance instructor at West Point. Here's the West Pointer. His father was a professional dance instructor. He's a dance instructor at West Point. He's eventually going to command a division during the crater in that area during the Petersburg campaign. Not the most effective commander. Some say he drank too much. But anyway, he says to the men, are you going to take that bridge? He's getting all riled up.
Yeah.
And they all yell out, no, we're not, especially the Pennsylvanians. We're not taking that bridge. And he's shocked. He says, what do you mean? You took our whiskey ration. Now, some infraction, whether they all got drunk, whether they didn't obey orders, what do? You pull the thing they value most, their whiskey ration. We're not taking that bridge. That'll teach you to pull our whiskey ration.
Right. Wow.
He says, well, wait a minute. What if I restore it? In fact, what if I give you as much as my purse? He actually used that word. They called him purse. Purse will permit. Will you take the bridge then? They said, yeah, we'll take it then. If you promise us lots of whiskey. Yes. So it's now like closer to 12:15, 12:20. And the two regiments will come running down. They're going to bull their way across. That's the plan. Bull their way across the bridge. There's a stone wall. If you're standing where the Georgia boys are, to the left of the bridge, there's a nice, beautiful stone wall.
On the far side of the river.
On the far side.
Or the creek.
Of the creek. On the other side, there's a fence. where the New York boys are coming down. And they get to that area, and the gunfire from the Georgians is so intense that they can't go any further. And the Pennsylvanians are going to stop behind that stone wall, and the New Yorkers are going to lie down behind the fence, and they're stuck. It's probably 12:30-ish or so, 12:35. They can't go forward. If they go back, they're going to get shot in the back. So they're not going, they're stuck. And the Colonel Potter of the I think it's Robert Potter of the New Yorkers, somehow makes his way across to talk to Colonel Hartraft. I hate that word. I can't pronounce it. Hartraft of the Pennsylvania boys. He says, "Listen, I think we can take this bridge. I'm watching what's going on at the top of the hill. They're not fighting. They're not firing like they were. I think we can take it." And the Pennsylvania colonel says, "Knock yourself out," essentially. He's got this nice stone walls. Men are protected. The New York colonel says, "Fine," goes back. He says, "Men, get up. We're taking the bridge." And they're getting up. They're heading toward the bridge. Pennsylvania colonel looks over and says, "I don't like the optics of this. Men, get up quick." And supposedly the two regiments are crossing over the bridge at the same time.
Oh, my gosh.
That's what's supposed to be happening. Well, the New York colonel was right. These guys, remember, the Georgia boys have been fighting since 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, and it is now close to 1 o'clock. So they've been fighting for 3 hours. They're getting hit by enemy artillery, not a lot, but still they're taking losses. They're running out of ammunition, and they're getting reports. The Yankees are coming behind us. Let's get the heck out of here.
Because Rodman finally found the ford.
Rodman found the ford.
How far is that ford? How long did he have to, just out of curiosity, did he have to move from the lower bridge to make it to the ford?
It's probably about a mile or so.
But it's through
downstream.
some terrible terrain.
Yeah, it really was.
And he's trying to find the ford.
He's got to find it. So he has to stop and look, and maybe some men have to jump in the creek and check it. And so at 1 o'clock, the bridge has fallen. But that's only the beginning of the problems. You got to take 12,000 or so Yanks from the 9th Corps, and they got to cross over that narrow bridge, across that ford, and they found another ford further upstream. It's going to take a while. And so it's not until about 3:15 that they're in position for the final attack against Lee's right flank. The problem is Lee, I wrote a book entitled Lee Invades the North, a comparison of the two campaigns. And I compared the number of, or percentage of troops that were committed to each of the actions, at Gettysburg, day 1, day 2, day 3, at the Sunken Road, at the cornfield area, and the final attack. Most of Lee's men, I think close to 60%, were committed to the cornfield area. He didn't have many reserves. He only had about 2,000 guys forming his right flank. That was it.
Wow.
Yikes.
And one of them was Drayton's brigade. They got beaten up pretty badly at Fox's Gap. And Kemper's brigade that got beaten up pretty badly at Frosttown Plateau. And so they're some of those regiments literally had 40 men making them up.
That's crazy to think about, a regiment with 40 guys in it. That's nuts.
Companies with like 1 or 2 guys. And they're not in fighting trim. Not only didn't they have numbers, these guys are stunned from fighting 3 days before. They have not recuperated. And if you look at that Union line in the last attack, it is amazing. And one thing that I learned in writing this book is the similarities between Pickett's charge and the final charge, but it's reversed. At Antietam, it's a Union Corps that's attacking, and it is about the same number as what Pickett and Pettigrew and Trimble had. The line is almost as long. It's almost a mile long. They didn't have to travel as wide an expanse. Pickett had to go almost a mile.
Yeah.
They're much closer. But you didn't have nearly the number of defenders at Antietam that you had at Gettysburg. In Gettysburg, you didn't have that many, about 5,500 or so around the copse of trees. They had about 2,000 or so. But what Lee didn't have on his right flank in infantry, he had an artillery. He just massed his artillery up. And they are coming up the ravine. And by the way, when you go to the battlefield, you see that the northern fields are fairly flat, rolling terrain. But you get to the southern portion, and there are deep ravines. I mean, it's going to be tough to be traversing those areas.
I've walked a portion of it, and it is no joke. It is no joke. Yep. I was huffing and puffing by the time I got to the top.
Yes.
The Hager, is it the Hagerstown Pike up there at the top? Or what's the road that
Boonesboro Pike.
The Boonesboro Pike
that goes right into Sharpsburg.
Yeah. But by the time I got to that road,
you were tired.
I was breathing heavy,
yes,
to say the least. And
and also keep in mind that what McClellan's plans were, if I'm successful to the north, which he was, if I'm successful to the south, which he was, I'm going to launch an attack against Lee's center.
Right up the gut.
Right up the gut, along Boonesboro Pike. And he's going to throw some U.S. regulars across. He's got some cavalry, but he never launches a major attack against Lee's center.
And he still has 2 corps, essentially, in reserve.
Well, he's got the 5th Corps. He's got the 6th Corps, but they've been committed more toward the cornfield, but they're really not engaged.
They're kind of in a defensive line at this point.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And so he never really launches that attack, although Pleasanton, the cavalry commander, Sumner, they're all agitating. As the final attack is being launched, attack down the center. And McClellan won't do it. And what maybe they didn't know, or maybe current historians don't realize, but Lee had hundreds, let's say scores, of cannon. Cemetery Hill was on the right of Boonesboro Pike. What's now the National Cemetery was on the left. High ground. Beautiful platforms for artillery. They would have been decimated. They would have been blown to pieces. And so he really never did launch that attack. All right, so they're in position. They're driving. They're driving Lee's right flank. They're getting closer and closer to Sharpsburg. They're going to drive Lee into the Potomac River. The war's going to be over. And
from what I understand, throughout this whole afternoon period, the whole time Lee is looking down the road, trying to find AP Hill. Where's Hill? Where's Hill? You know,
Hill's going to be a savior.
And the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way I understand it is he's looking and he sees a dust cloud, and I don't know if after that he sees a flag and thinks it's a Union flag, but for whatever reason he initially thinks that dust cloud is another Union column marching in on him. Correct?
I believe so.
But needless to say, that's not who it is.
No, and actually, in thinking about the location, first of all, let's talk about AP Hill, and then we'll get back to that point. AP Hill is part of Stonewall Jackson's wing. He took 3 divisions, Stonewall Jackson to Harper's Ferry. They're going to be looping around to the west. And you got Lafayette McLaws with a couple of divisions. You got John Walker. So they're going to be encircling Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry is going to fall on the morning of the 15th. And Lee is screaming, I need you guys coming back here. I'm going to get attacked around Antietam Creek. And so Jackson's going to take all of those guys will be on the road the evening of the 15th, 16th, 2 divisions. He's going to send others on the evening of the 16th, 17th. Walker's division is going to make its way. So eventually, the entire army is going to be reconstituted around Antietam Creek by 10 o'clock in the morning, or so when Anderson reaches there. But he's still missing one of his divisions, and that's A.P. Hill. And A.P. Hill, now remember, why did Lee invade the North? One of the major reasons was supplies. There are 12,000 Yankees also in the garrison that they've captured. Do you just say, hey, guys, just go back that way and then you'll be able to attack us? No, you're going to parole them. You want to process their capture. You got dozens and dozens of cannon. You going to leave those behind? No. And you've got all of these tons and tons of supplies. A.P. Hill is going to be left behind. On the morning of the battle, Lee's going to send a messenger desperately telling A.P. Hill, get to Sharpsburg ASAP. And whereas most of the other troops are going to be marching through Sharpsburg, A.P. Hill will take a shortcut, and he'll come up right where Lee's right flank is, on the Miller Sawmill Road from the Potomac River. If you look at the alignment, where that dust cloud would be, it more likely would have been A.P. Hill than Union troops, but it's possible.
Well, I guess the way I understood it is he thought initially it might have been Union troops, and then realized, oh, that's not Union, that's
right.
A.P. Hill.
That's right.
Now, one thing I just want to touch on, because we're talking all like the story that happens, but that's pretty remarkable that he gets from Harper's Ferry when he leaves, and he makes it there in time to fight in the last assault against the Confederate line. How far of a march is that for his men?
Well, that's an interesting point, because more recent historians have criticized the march. Now, he had to get there quick, but apparently the route he took was not the fastest route, number one. It was about 17, 18 miles.
Yikes.
It's pretty long.
It's a long hike.
Remember, these guys were they're exhausted.
Yeah.
They're marching so fast that about half of his men are going to fall from the ranks. So he may have started with about 4,000. He's going to get there maybe with closer to 2,000.
Well, I mean, if
Makes
so, just to keep in mind, to kind of put this into perspective for the listener out there, they're part of Jackson's foot cavalry.
That's correct.
Right? They're known for being fast.
Yes.
And if half of them are falling out, that means they are moving lightning fast.
They are. They're probably double timing it at times, double quick.
That is so miserable. I'm thinking about times where we've had hikes like that.
Yes.
There is
very
few things worse than that.
Right.
It is miserable. And the dust, when the dust starts kicking up and it's in your throat.
That's correct.
It's terrible. It is terrible. And it's hot. It's September in Maryland, which is smoking hot still.
But they've been told that Lee is in desperate straits, and their countrymen are in trouble, and that's motivating them.
Yeah.
But, if you can't do it, if you got sunstroke, you're going to fall by the side of the road. And so they're going to come up, and immediately, as soon as they come up, they're going to be thrown into battle. So he doesn't wait till his whole division comes up. As each brigade comes up, Branch's brigade, I believe, is the first one that comes up, is deployed and thrown into battle. Gregg's brigade, Archer's brigade, and immediately they're going to crash into those Yankees, who think, we've got them on the run.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, come all these thousands of rebels. And it really did. And, some would say, and it's kind of interesting, I don't know if this is necessarily true, but remember, the scuttlebutt was that Lee had 100,000 men. There weren't 100,000 men on that battlefield. Where are they? All of a sudden, here they're coming. All
the scuttlebutt meaning what George McClellan thought they had.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And here are these guys just showing up.
And could it be the other 50,000 or so are going to be hitting our left flank, the Union left flank? And the Ninth Corps, they were not the most experienced fighters. They had fought at Fox's Gap. The fighting in North Carolina was not pitched battles. They did a good job, though. But when you're flanked and you're not expecting it.
Especially by A.P. Hill's, it's the Light Brigade.
Yes, it was the
or the light division. I mean,
light division. Yes,
I mean they're salty, as we would say nowadays.
yes, they're good. They're good fighters.
The story that stands out, we actually talked about it a little bit in the last episode, but I forget where they're from, but it's a brand new unit, and they learn how to load their weapons.
16th Connecticut,
the day
in
before
the
the battle.
cornfield, the 40-acre cornfield.
And when you're referencing the cornfield, this is again not the morning
Not
corn,
the
not
cornfield.
Miller's cornfield. It's on the
Yeah.
it's on the southern
this
end
is
of
the
the battlefield.
40-acre cornfield.
Got me with
in the
that
southern
last
end.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So from my understanding, I'm just going to set the scene for the listeners and
Yes.
kind of let you take off here with it. But they're lined up next to a veteran unit,
4th Rhode Island.
and somehow moving through that cornfield,
Yes.
one of the units, I don't know which one, but one of them gets a good bit ahead of the other one.
Right.
Who gets in front of who there? Is it the
I think it's the 1st South Carolina will get in front.
I mean of
Oh.
the Union units, like they're marching on line, and one kind of gets ahead of the other unit. That's where that gap that they hit is. Am I remembering this right? There's a gap that
Oh. You're talking about the 8th, the 9th New York and the 8th Connecticut. They will, well, let's do the 8th Connecticut. The 8th Connecticut will be driving forward toward the Union, toward the Confederate right flank. Okay, they're going to flank them. The rest of the brigade is not following, and I believe this is Harlan's brigade. And what happens is you have one unit all the way up at the top of the ridge line, and you have the other two down in the 40-acre cornfield. And they're trying to get it up, those two regiments up. But Rodman sees them up there, the 8th Connecticut. And he says, these guys are going to get slaughtered. They're all by themselves. There's a big gap. And if it's me, I'm sending an aide. I'm not going up there.
right.
But in the spur of the moment, he just doesn't even think. He just rides up there
it's
to
dire.
bring them back.
It's a dire situation. He's
yes.
got to find out what's going
He's
on.
got to do it himself.
Yeah.
And here's a division commander in great jeopardy, and he will be mortally wounded. There's a mortuary cannon at the top there, and he's going to pay the ultimate price for caring about his men. And they will eventually come back down. You also had the 9th New York also independently will be going up. Hawkins Zouaves will also be going up. And they actually capture a battery, or almost capture a battery. And this was a little bit earlier on and further toward the town. So you had a couple of regiments that were able to get up there, but they were not supported. And you had some problems. Wilcox's division is over by the National Cemetery. And you have some problems with their movements. You have Christ's brigade moving fairly rapidly up toward what's now the cemetery. And Welsh's brigade was supposed to be coming up on their left flank, but they weren't. It was apparently the terrain was more rugged for them. And Christ sees what's going on, and he says, "Wait a minute, why am I attacking the Confederate positions? Where's Welsh? I'm going to wait for him." And you have this miscommunication. And so finally Welsh comes up, and Welsh will drive forward and hit the Confederate line. Christ really never does engage. And so there's this miscommunication going on all along the line. But the Union troops are fighting fairly effective. I mean, they're driving the Confederates away, and if it weren't for A.P. Hill, and here's where we get into the what if, and I don't like what ifs. But what if they found that ford, Isaac Rodman had the right ford at 10 o'clock in the morning? What if they had crossed at 10:30? What if they were in position before noon?
A.P. Hill never shows up in time. It could be a very different outcome.
It would have been because Lee was beside himself, as you mentioned.
Now, what kind of effect when A.P. Hill does arrive and his division smacks into the 9th Corps, what kind of effect does that have on the 9th Corps?
It's definitely going to have a psychological impact. They don't know who these guys are, though. All they knew was they're driving these Confederates away, and all these fresh, like this fresh, Confederate troops are entering the battle, and they could tell these guys are veterans. These are not inexperienced guys. A lot of the guys from the 9th Corps were not the most seasoned, and so as you mentioned, as we talked about, the 16th Connecticut had never learned how to load the rifles before that morning. So I think it had a big psychological impact.
And again, we mentioned before, panic will spark up in the blink of an eye, and it spreads like wildfire.
But to the credit of the 9th Corps, and maybe because there were so many of them, they never did cut and run. There was fighting all through those fields, and even the 16th Connecticut gave a pretty good fight.
An organized retreat.
Yes, an organized retreat with the 4th Rhode Island. And they actually stopped the Greg's veteran South Carolina boys in the cornfield for a while.
Oh, wow.
There had to be a couple of charges before they finally flanked them. And then Greg's men are going to come around and flank other Union troops, but they're not giving up so fast. And the fighting is going to be pretty bloody until really nightfall puts an end to the fighting. But if there's more daylight, I think it's quite possible that the Union would have prevailed. You had a couple of brigades that were not engaged of A.P. Hill's division that had not arrived in time. A Brockenbrough's brigade, Fields, and Pender's, who could have been thrown into battle later on, but they were small. So it's really the Union side or maybe the Confederate side were saved by the bell, saved by nightfall.
Yeah.
So it becomes, it's like a, warm spit kind of thing. Neither side is
right.
Is won.
It's effective. The APL showing up is effective, but it's not like when I forget the specific unit, the Confederate unit that shows up at First Manassas, like that pretty much routs the Union Army.
Johnston's army coming from the Shenandoah Valley.
Right, and there's like one or two brigades in particular that show up after Jackson's been kind of almost practically routed off of Henry Hill.
Yes.
And his men are in, they're scrambled behind the hill.
That's right.
It's him along with Jeb Stuart's cavalry conduct this charge just shortly after that, when the Union thinks they've finally taken the hill.
Right.
And it just turns into this chaotic rout.
Yes.
It's not like that.
Oh, no, not at all. They're holding their position. They're not retreating.
Good. And well, that's I'm glad we kind of talked about it that way, because it's easy to think that that's how it plays out.
Okay, definitely not.
And I if you're just now learning about the battle, or if you've just read a few things about it, it's easy to picture it that way.
Right.
How do you feel about taking a break here, and then we'll come back and kind of wrap up the aftermath? And
yeah, how about a pit stop?
Perfect.
This episode brought to you by Civil War Trails. With over 1,300 sites to explore across 6 states, Civil War Trails is the world's largest open-air museum. Drive the Gettysburg Campaign turn by turn. Paddle past Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote artillery positions. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. Civil War Trails is not just about the adventure. When you stand in the footsteps of history, these stories become more relevant than ever before. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure today.
We've covered the whole campaign in pretty good detail.
Yes.
And we get to the end of the 17th, and nighttime falls, and you still have Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia manning a line on the western side of the battlefield, and you have McClellan and the Army of the Potomac on the eastern side of the battlefield, kind of faced off against each other. Real quickly, because we won't go into too much detail about the follow-on actions, but if you can kind of sum up kind of quickly what happens over the course of the next few days as the campaign finishes out.
Well, even before I could do that, Colby, let me just mention one more thing. Robert E. Lee, despite this pitched battle, is not so certain he wants to give up the invasion. And on the afternoon of the fighting, he's going to send Jeb Stuart on a mission to move north along with imagine the Potomac River is on his left, to see if he can find a pathway to pull his army out and continue moving north. And what's going to happen is, as this cavalry contingent moves north, it's going to encounter the area around Nicodemus Heights, around where the Joseph Poffenberger farm is in that area, masses and masses of Union artillery. And Jeb Stuart's going to pull back and say, there's no way we can go up that way. So that evening, they're basically, Lee is not so sure he wants to give up the invasion. And Jackson, who's very aggressive, as you know, and Longstreet, who's a little bit less, who's more defense-minded, are going to convince him that this is not a fight that needs to continue.
Even Jackson, which is surprising because Jackson is usually never like that.
Right. And so Lee is going to remain in position all of the next day. Just like at Gettysburg, on the 4th of July, here on the 18th of September, Lee's in position. And he's desperately hoping that McClellan will attack again. McClellan's getting all kinds of reinforcements. And initially he thought he was going to attack, and he decided against it.
Well, do you know kind of just in a nutshell what his reasonings were? I mean, was it the casualties or?
I think that's part of it. I don't know if, and I think he was concerned about perhaps, winning, essentially winning a battle and then sort of tossing it away with a defeat. He was fine with not destroying Lee's army. He always believed you needed to go easy on the South. So stopping the invasion, stopping them at that battle was enough for him. And so Lee will cross the Potomac River after nightfall on the 18th, and we'll start heading away. And Battle of Shepherdstown is going to happen after, when the Union Fifth Corps, that was part of the Fifth Corps that was not engaged at Antietam, is going to be crossing over the Potomac River after the Lee's army. And A.P. Hill hears, well, not A.P. Hill, Jackson hears that they're being followed, and he sends A.P. Hill's division back, and you're going to have this fight where it's almost like Ball's Bluff in 1861, where they almost trapped these Union units against the Potomac River, almost destroy them. And the 118th Pennsylvania, the Corn Regiment, was almost destroyed because of some confusion. So that really, and some would say that the campaign didn't end there, that Lee's going to start moving north in Virginia, as though he wants to continue and you have the Loudon campaign after. But for all intents and purposes, the campaign is basically over at that point. What's interesting is what happens with, especially the Union Army. The Union Army has suffered pretty dramatic losses, and what's going to happen is that McClellan will hear a rumor that Lincoln is coming to visit the Army. Now imagine you are the Army commander, and your boss is coming to visit you, doesn't even tell you he's coming.
Just surprise.
Yeah. And I think that tells you a little bit about the relationship the two men had.
Oh, there's no trust there.
There's no trust. There's really a very, very hostile relationship that is developing. And it's interesting because when he comes, he's going to come on October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, Lincoln. He will tell McClellan that he wants to review the troops, he wants to visit the wounded, and he wants to confer with McClellan. And there's some iconic photographs of the two of them in a tent outside of the Stephen Grove home, which is just outside of Sharpsburg, and you see them sitting together. And if you read the letter that McClellan will write to his wife after, how Lincoln is supporting him, and it's okay for him to keep his army in place, and he did fine. And I don't, Lincoln may have been a little bit more like Robert E. Lee. He didn't like to be the bad guy. And when he had Henry Halleck, and I know I'm rambling a little bit, but Henry Halleck becomes general-in-chief. This was around the Second Bull Run campaign. Henry Halleck becomes the bad cop. And Lincoln can whisper in his general-in-chief's ear, Henry Halleck, this, I'm not happy about this. I want him to do this. But he doesn't have to be the bad guy. He can have Halleck give the orders or send these communications. And it's possible that Lincoln just, and I used to be college president. I didn't want to be the bad guy. I want to be the good guy.
Yeah, it's not fun being the bad guy.
Never.
So McClellan has this perception that he's fine. He's in good stead with Lincoln. And this is now, what happens now becomes the source of great controversy. McClellan will not cross the Potomac River for 6 weeks after the battle. And he is severely criticized after that, after the war, for that, not going after Lee. And there's been some recent scholarship that has suggested that McClellan's army was in bad shape. They didn't have ammunition. They didn't have shoes. They didn't have supplies. And he's waiting to be resupplied before you go into another battle.
And they've also taken how many casualties?
Oh, yes.
Up to this point. The whole... the whole number. This is total Union and Confederate, but the whole campaign it results with over 40,000 casualties. That's wounded, missing.
Well, actually, closer to 23,000 for just Antietam.
Yeah, I'm talking about the whole
right.
campaign, right? So he starting from the beginning until now.
Yes,
and I don't know how many on each side, but here, just at Antietam, there's 23,000 casualties.
Right.
And I would say it's more than the Union lose a greater number than
it's proportional. So they're going to lose more.
They're also on the attack, and that makes sense. The Confederates are on the defensive.
That's correct.
But that's the bloodiest day in American history, and up to that point, it is by far the bloodiest campaign in the war.
Right.
And to expect that army. And McClellan to get that army just up and moving again after something so catastrophic, that's unrealistic.
Right.
And anybody that is, at the time at least, anybody that is being super judgmental on that most likely has never been in anything like that.
And Lincoln has never been. And it's interesting because Meade had the same experience. And I think
Here
we
at
talked
Gettysburg.
about that earlier.
And I sympathize with Meade because
Yes.
it's the bloodiest battle in American history. And
It is.
And they're giving him a hard time about not chasing Lee down.
And he doesn't have the supplies he needs. Half of Oliver Howard, commander of the 11th Corps, says half my men don't have shoes. I mean, Lincoln didn't know it, didn't want to know about it. All he knew was great victory. Let's finish him off. And angry with Meade. What was the greatest battle in American history up to that point is being downplayed essentially by Lincoln, saying he didn't finish him off. And I think any military, you don't even have to be military to know if you have a seasoned army with its back against a barrier, it's like a rat against the wall. You don't want to attack that rat.
No. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox from the Revolution, he had realized after he had conducted a few raiding campaigns that you never fully surround an enemy. You always leave an avenue of escape open because they'll fight 3 times as hard if you have them completely cut off.
Indeed.
And that is 100% the case.
Right. So, despite the feeling that McClellan was in good stead with Lincoln, he's shocked when he receives orders the day after the general election, midterm election, to return to his home in New Jersey and await further orders. Now, Lincoln, if he's anything, he is a brilliant strategist when it comes to marketing and politics. And he knows how popular McClellan is with his troops and in the North. And he knows if he removes him before the general election, people are going to vote out of spite Democratic. So he waits till the day after the midterm election. He's very bright, very, very savvy. So McClellan is out of the picture. And a lot of people will say one of the reasons why McClellan is vilified as much as he has been is because he had the audacity of challenging President Lincoln in the re-election campaign of 1864, which I think there's some validity to that.
There is, and you think about this too. I mean, this is just a side note here, but think about the catastrophic effects a McClellan victory would have had on the country, because we would not have ended up the same way as we have.
It's true. There would be a Confederacy at this point. There's little doubt about that. So yeah, I agree with you.
So I mean, I'm all right with McClellan's reputation being tarnished historically for the outcome we did get.
Right.
But if we're being fair, a lot of that I think has to do with that, that exactly.
I think so too.
So, it's talking about legacy. We've mentioned a few times that this is the bloodiest battle in American history.
Right.
And just over 23,000 casualties just at the Battle of Antietam alone.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize this, but the Battle of South Mountain it's more casualties than the first Battle of Bull Run.
Right.
So it in itself
bloody.
is a big battle.
Yes.
But all of this is for a reason, and beyond just stopping Lee's northern invasion, there is a motivation behind why Lincoln needs a victory. He needs a victory, one, to secure, the midterm elections.
Yes.
But there's something even greater than that that's on the horizon. And what is that?
Okay. So Lincoln is very, very clear. He's fighting this war in 1861, 1862 to save the Union. He's getting a lot of... Now, he's an abolitionist. He does not believe in slavery. And he's getting a lot of pressure to free the slaves. But he won't do it. And he's very clear, this fight is to preserve the Union. They're not going to break apart on my watch. And Frederick Douglass and others are very unhappy with him because he's not taking action. Well, what happens is it's the story of the Emancipation Proclamation is a fascinating one, and there's all these sidelights. And I might not be right on this. You're going to get Brad Gottfried's interpretation of the Emancipation Proclamation, why this is the turning point of the Civil War. Some will say it's Vicksburg. Some will say it's the Wilderness and Overland Campaign. Some will say Gettysburg. And I'll say, nope. It's this one. And it's because of the Emancipation Proclamation. And I don't think that initially the Emancipation Proclamation was all about slavery. I think it was all about keeping the country together. And the story really begins during the summer of 1862 when Lincoln, and he'd probably been thinking about this for a while, he comes to the cabinet, he says, I got this idea. I'm going to issue this proclamation that's going to free the slaves in states in rebellion.
Because there's still a handful of slave states that are
Maryland,
in the Union.
Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, but they stayed with the Union. And he knew that if he abolished slavery in their states, they would side with the Confederacy. He'd lose
and he
those.
couldn't afford that.
He could not afford that. In fact, it's interesting. I think it was earlier in 1862. I think it was Indiana. No, it was Missouri. Missouri, I believe that was the state, said, we want to raise a regiment of African-American soldiers. Will you accept them into the military? He says, no, because I might get 1,000 guys, but I'm going to lose the whole state. It's not worth it. Keep those guys. And so what happens then is this Emancipation Proclamation will not affect any northern states, Maryland, Delaware, etc. He brings it to the cabinet. The cabinet is shocked. They had no idea he's even considering this. And they said, this looks like a death. We're doing this like a death grasp because we're losing every battle we're fighting in the East. You've got to wait until a major Union victory, preferably in the north. And this is it. And so 5 days after, he's going to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. But it's not the Emancipation Proclamation. On the 22nd of September, he issues the preliminary. Now, it's essentially a war order. It's a executive order. How many executive orders has Biden, has Trump, has Obama, has Bush put out that were preliminary?
I mean, countless.
Yeah, lots and lots.
Especially amongst all of them. That's countless.
No, none.
What preliminary? I guess I misunderstood. They've put out executive orders,
And
but not preliminary.
There's no preliminaries. They're all enacted. I sign it,
They're all
done.
signed, yeah.
This is preliminary.
Is he testing the waters, kind of?
And so this
God,
is
he's
my
smart,
perspective.
isn't he?
I think so.
It's,
So essentially, he says to the South, "Listen, guys, I've got this Emancipation Proclamation. I haven't. It's only preliminary now. It's not the rule of the land, but you have the rest of September, October, November, December to come back into the Union. If you come back into the Union before January 1st, 1863, when I'm going to sign the real one, you're not in rebellion. You can keep your slaves. What do you think?"
He's trying to
Wow.
entice. Listen.
I didn't know any of that.
Shelby Foote, very famously in the Ken Burns Civil War
Yes.
documentary, says that there's two geniuses that were developed in the Civil War.
Yes.
One being Nathan Bedford Forrest, which tactically, I guess you could say that he
You're right.
is that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's a character that could have his own episode all to his lonesome.
Yes.
But Lincoln is truly a genius.
There is no question about it. The more you read about Lincoln, the more impressed you become.
I'm just floored by him. Doing this podcast, I knew a good bit about him already. I mean, more than the average bear. But I started getting into Lincoln. Lincoln. The years before he's elected as president, and what
Yes.
watching him develop into this politician that he becomes, and then how he, I'll put it to you this way. George Washington is an incredible president. Simply, if you were to cut everything else away that he did, and you just solely went off the fact that he had the foresight to only do 2 terms and give up the position, brilliant. And for that, he is forever going to be one of the greatest American presidents.
Yes.
Because he set the standard.
Yes,
he set the
he
tone.
certainly did.
And if he didn't, he would have just become another king, right? But even that, he doesn't even come close to Lincoln, because what Lincoln had to do, the country had torn itself apart, and he had to somehow manage to put it back
That's
together, and simultaneously deal with, the biggest blemish, or even to be more accurate, the biggest crime against humanity that America had committed that wasn't dealt with in the Revolution.
Right.
He had to deal with that simultaneously.
Right.
And he did it. I don't think there's another human being that's lived before, during, or after Lincoln that could have done it the way Lincoln did it.
And you think about how he was vilified during his life. He was made fun of. He was folksy. He was ugly.
Always
he was
trying to tell
ungainly,
jokes, stories and jokes.
Yes. Unpresidential. And it had to affect him, but he never really showed it. And there are stories of Lincoln being snubbed by McClellan, personally.
Going when him and Seward show up at McClellan's house early on in
Yes,
the
to
war,
meet
and
with
McClellan
him.
doesn't even come down
That's
to
right.
see him.
He snubs him. And yet, the only thing he said is, in the future, McClellan will come to me. But that was it. And it never showed, if it were me, you're fired.
Yeah. Oh, I would have had if I was Lincoln, I would have fired McClellan long before he did.
But he needed McClellan.
He did need.
He
McClellan.
needed the good McClellan.
And McClellan, we've already said this. There's things that McClellan did for the Army of the Potomac that no one else could have done, and he deserves credit where
There's
credit
no
is
question
due.
about that. Army after First Bull Run was a mess, and to make an army the way he created this army of almost 130,000 men, and I do sympathize with him. If I spent my blood and sweat and toil trying to get this army, this beautiful army that you sit there and you watch them march along, they're being paraded by. Do I want to take them into battle and destroy what I've created, I could understand being very reluctant.
I could too. And he almost had like this relationship. He was fatherly to his his army.
They loved this man.
And they would cheer, and he shows up on his horse. But unfortunately, being an army commander, you have to be able to separate that.
And he couldn't. Although second Bull Run, at Antietam, I think he realized either he has to or he loses everything. And it just, he just could not do what, I don't think any man could have done what Lincoln wanted.
No,
only Grant could have done it.
Only Grant, and probably at that point, who knows? Grant might not have been able to do what Lincoln wanted at that point.
Not at that point.
Because he still had some learning to do too.
Oh, he did. And Vicksburg taught him so much about tenacity, and flexibility and the like. And it's.
Lincoln also is dealing with just a year before this, he lost his son. And his wife is losing her mind.
Yes,
and he's still dealing with that at this time.
And he's already lost his son Edward in 1850.
Before his presidency.
Yes.
So, Lincoln, for instance, when his son does die, Willie dies, I think he takes the afternoon to go to the funeral, and the next morning he's back at work.
That's right.
That's unfathomable to me.
I agree.
I couldn't imagine that. And yet Lincoln, not only is he this just brilliant leader and brilliant politician, and in the way he, we were talking the other day about how, how certain people know how to address people to get the reaction they want.
Right.
I don't think there's anybody in the history of America that's been as good at that as Lincoln is.
Oh, there's no question about that.
So we got off on a side tangent there, but I just find Lincoln so fascinating. It's hard not to sit there and talk about him.
But even thinking about the Gettysburg campaign, he's lost two sons. His baby Tad is on his deathbed with smallpox, and he's still coming to Gettysburg, despite having lost two sons and having a wife that's furious with him, because he had to cement this Union sentiment. We've got to continue this fight. These men did not die in vain. We can't loosen up. We've got to continue. And that he put the country above his own personal family and his own personal feelings. And that's special.
It is special. Yes. That is it's hard to find someone that, because they say absolute power corrupts.
Yes, not for him.
Not for him. He is the exception to that. And
Right.
he took his role as commander in chief and as the guiding light for the country in its darkest hour.
Mm-hmm.
He took the responsibility of that very, very seriously.
No question.
So getting back to the Emancipation Proclamation, the legacy that it has with the Battle of Antietam. and the campaign.
So the key to the Emancipation Proclamation is that January 1st, 1863 rolls around. None of the southern states take advantage of Lincoln's offer. They are not coming back into the Union. They're keeping their slaves. Heck with it. And then something happens that I'm not clear about. And that is the war had started and had gotten to this point because it was a war to keep the country together. It wasn't a war to abolish slavery. But after this, it all shifted. It became a war to abolish slavery. And I've written a couple books. One is Stopping Pickett, the history of the Philadelphia Brigade. Another's Kearny's Own, the history of the 1st New Jersey Brigade. And you look at letters, you look at diaries, you look at what these soldiers were writing when they found out about the Emancipation Proclamation. And they're angry because they're saying, we did not enlist to free these blankety blanks. We enlisted to keep the country together. And now you've shifted goals on us. Now think about this. England and France, they're this close to recognizing the South. They've freed their slaves decades before. Are they going to morally be able to close their eyes to slavery? Oh, we can't have it, but we are going to be helping a country, I don't know if you want to call it a country, but an area of the United States that wants to be free to keep their slaves.
Good point.
And at that point, and I always ask people, could we have won the American Revolution without France's help?
No.
No.
No, we could not have.
Now, could the South have prevailed? It's possible, but not militarily. More, it would have been Union sentiment saying, done.
It would have been essentially every loss in a major conflict that the U.S. has suffered has been as a result of the populace, the public populace's demand for the war to end.
Right. That's indeed.
That's
right.
the only way that the Confederacy would have won.
That's correct. And they got close, but ultimately it didn't happen. And so, but if England and France had come in on the side of the Confederacy, the first thing they would have done was killed the blockade. And then, broker a peace, what does that mean? I wouldn't be surprised if at least English troops were not fighting right next to Lee's army. And I don't think the typical American wanted to see that kind of war escalating.
No, I mean, that would have been catastrophic if France and England would have recognized the Confederacy as a sovereign nation.
Yes.
That would have been a catastrophic thing to have happen.
Yes.
And you were saying earlier that you kind of get a lot of pushback on calling this the turning point, because a lot of people do consider either Gettysburg or Vicksburg to be the turning point of the war. I would say the overwhelming majority of people say that, and maybe tactically, or strategic / tactically, yes. But in the grand scheme of things, I agree with you. The war shifts after Antietam due to the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yes.
Because of that, it switches the purpose, the Union's purpose, its goal at the end of the day. It shifts that from preservation of the Union
That's
to
right.
freeing slaves.
That's right. And as part of it, there's going to be over 100,000 African Americans able and will join. I think it's actually closer to 200,000 that will join the Union forces. The preliminary didn't have that. And so now you have African Americans joining, and that certainly helped the war effort as well. So that's why not only is this the bloodiest one-day battle in American history, but it also is going to be what essentially is going to be the beginning of the end of the Confederacy. And I'm sticking by it.
I think that's very valid. They call specifically they call Pickett's charge the high water mark of the Confederacy.
Right.
I personally look at it as the first of the death throes of the Confederacy.
Yes.
Because even after Pickett's charge, there's going to be plenty of times in the rest of the war where the Confederates really put up a crazy fight.
Yes.
And the war gets nothing but nastier from that point on. Yes, it is the high water mark in the sense that it's the furthest north they got. The Gettysburg is the furthest north they got, and
Right.
XYZ. But as far as the likelihood of them coming away from this war as a sovereign nation or coming back into the Union with the things that they desired to come back into the Union with, that ends at Antietam.
Right. So it's so important, and I'm glad we had this opportunity to chat about this campaign.
I am too. We very much appreciate you coming on. Now, real quick before we end, obviously you've written a number of books, and you guide. You do guided tours. You're a licensed battlefield guide at Antietam, as well as here in Gettysburg. You're a town guide.
Town guide, yes.
So tell everybody about it, where they can find your books, and if they want to get a tour with you, all that good stuff.
Sure. I hate to talk about the 800-pound gorilla, but Amazon, if you type my name into Amazon, you'll see all 18 will pop up. So there's that. And then to take a Antietam battlefield tour, which I can't stress highly enough how interesting it can be. You would call the Antietam, well, you go to the website, which is the Antietam Battlefield Guide website, and they talk about the kinds of tours, the length of the tours, the price of the tours, as well as how to schedule a tour. And then same thing, if you want to take a town tour, and again, town tours are really neat in Gettysburg. I'm trying to convince both of you guys. I think you went.
We're
to.
We're definitely going to. As soon as the weather gets, it's hot out there
it's
right
too
now.
hot now.
But as soon as it starts to cool off a little bit, you count us in. I'm up for it.
Well, and the battlefield special. There's no question about it at Gettysburg, but the town oftentimes is shortchanged. How the civilians managed, who stayed here, Eisenhower, the formation of the town, the African American experience, fascinating. Go on to the Gettysburg Licensed Town Guide website, Google that, and all kinds of information. We have evening tours, we have day tours. It's just kind of neat. So between the two, I'm hoping to see people at both places.
Absolutely, I'm hoping we do too. But specifically for this month, for September, everybody's got to get out to Antietam.
Definitely,
you'd be doing yourself a great service getting out there to see it. Lastly, what do you have in the chute? You mentioned a little bit at the beginning of our talks. What do you have in the works right now?
Okay, so the book it should be out very soon, potentially before the end of the year. Is Race to the Potomac. It's a shorter book. It's Emerging Civil War series on what happens to the armies after Gettysburg. From Lee leaving the battlefield to crossing the Potomac River on the 14th. So there's that. We're editing, the publishers are editing the maps of Second Bull Run. That's coming out. I'm doing another one for Casemate Books. They have a series of books on World War II, World War I, and Ted Savas, who owns Savas Beatty, wants to do a series on the Civil War. So I'm doing one. It's due in March on the Overland Campaign.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm doing that one. And right now I'm working on maps of the peninsula in 7 days. So I'm not bored. Let's put it that way.
It sounds like you're a very busy man.
It sounds like you're not really even retired.
This is true. But my life is my own. Well, and my wife's.
There you go. She owns the majority. I'm sure
Yes,
if
she
she's
does.
anything like mine. That being said, as someone that has to research the Civil War often, as someone that is a fan of Civil War history, I'm a huge fan of your books.
Thank you.
I think that you provide, all of us that are interested in this subject a great service by making your map books.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been lost halfway through the journey of learning this stuff up till now if I didn't have those maps to reference. So make sure everybody out there, make sure you go get these books.
Yes.
They're fantastic. I'm
Thank you.
looking forward very much to reading your books come out in the future. Your second Manassas book, you've already got a buyer right here. I'm waiting eagerly. And then I always love the Overland Campaign. That last year of the war is it's dark,
it's brutal,
it's a grind, and for me, what I find so interesting, specifically about war history, U.S. War history, is I like observing people on the fringes of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not many things that are more extreme than total war. And as far as the Civil War goes, the Overland Campaign is the most extreme it gets. I mean, it is the nastiest, most.
There's one that's even worse.
Well, what's that?
Petersburg.
I always clump that in.
I understand.
I always clump that in with the Overland, but yes, Petersburg is.
I have to mention, I got halfway through the maps of Petersburg. I had to stop. They're killing each other every day. It's brutal every day. I said to myself, I can't do it anymore. Because when I do, I feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm a soldier.
Yeah.
And I had to take a rest, and the rest was Second Bull Run.
There you go.
That was easier.
Still nasty, but
nasty, but not as nasty.
No, it's a different war. You know what it is? It's the first signs of World War I. Is what you see in Petersburg.
Yeah. No question.
With the trenches, with the way they're fighting, with
the brutality.
It is just vicious.
Yes.
It is vicious, and the guys that somehow deal with that on a daily basis and still find a way to overcome that and do what they have to do.
Amazing.
I will always tout this for the rest of my life, but the most incredible thing I ever saw in war, it's nothing that I did, it's nothing that my leaders did. The most incredible thing I saw in war was these young kids. They'd be, because I was 21, 22 when I went. I was still very young, but you have kids that are 17, 18 years old that are in the most dangerous place in the world.
Right.
And they're experiencing the worst combat that's happening in the war at that time. Some of the worst combat of the war. And every day they get up and they go out and face it head on with a smile on their face.
Right.
Whereas, most people, they face it once, they're never going to want to go back again.
That's
and you
right.
have these young guys
Wow.
that somehow they just do it day in, day out, and they don't complain. I mean, they complain a little bit. You're not a soldier or a Marine unless you complain a little bit, but they do the job, and they do the job willingly, and they give everything they have to it, and that's what I find so fascinating. So I'm very excited about your Overland Campaign book. Hopefully one day you finish the Petersburg book, because I'll buy that
it'll
too.
get done.
And other than that, Brad, it's been a pleasure having you on.
Colby.
Do you have a website people can check out?
Oh, yeah, bradgottfried.com or bradleygottfried.com. I'm not as diligent as I should be in keeping it up to date, but it has all kinds of information there.
I got on a little. The reason I asked you, I got on a little bit and read your background.
Yeah.
And I didn't know you had a PhD in zoology.
Zoology,
That's
yeah.
very interesting. It's a big change from.
It's amazing how many, and I'm not going to call myself a historian.
We called you that at the beginning of the show.
I call myself someone who writes about history. And it's amazing how many people who write, and they're good writers, not to say me, who are not historians. I mean, one of my favorite authors, two of them actually, Gordon Ray, who is the guru of the Overland Campaign, is an attorney, and Masterson.
Okay, yes.
Kent Masterson Brown, who's done some wonderful, wonderful books on Gettysburg and Meade, is also an attorney.
Isn't that crazy?
And so you don't have to be a historian to have a passion for history and to write.
No, you don't. Honestly, that's part of the reason we were so excited to do this podcast, because neither of us are historians, but obviously we're both our angle into this is we're combat veterans, know, and we're just trying to relate the stories of other combat veterans.
Sure.
Now, we're history enthusiasts, but not historians. But I was telling you, we took a break. I was telling you I came from a musical background, an entertainment background.
Oh, okay.
And that's one of the big bummers about guys that are very historically minded, is that a lot of the times it doesn't end up being entertaining. And I think it's refreshing when you get these people that come from outside of that realm to tell a story.
Right.
Because they typically will tell it in a very entertaining way.
We look at history in a very different way. Many historians, they're very analytical, and I try to make it interesting. I put my spin on it, that I'm not changing history, but I'm trying to make it truly, as an educator, I'm trying to make it interesting.
Make it interesting. You have to make it a story. People need a story.
Very much so.
And the biggest thing that a lot of historians fail to see is that the thing that connects us to the history is not the dates, it's not the numbers, it's not the uniforms. So a lot of reenactors, and I don't mean to step on any toes, but they get so caught up in that stuff.
Right.
The most important thing is the human experience.
Oh, no question about it.
And if you can't relate that human experience in a story, you're going to lose, the outline. They're not going to. There's a lot of people that are going to be lost off that. So your books are fantastic.
Thank you.
Obviously, you're so knowledgeable on the Maryland campaign, and I look forward to seeing you around Antietam.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
And
as well.
obviously, we have to have you back on. Especially when your books your books in the future come out.
Definitely.
We might have to have you on for a second Manassas one, and then have you on for an Overland
Sounds
campaign
good to
one.
me. Let's do it.
All right,
Thank
Brad.
you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.